Well, Cardiff City had been looking to, been getting used to finishing in the bottom half after two successive finishes around that vicinity of the table, and even in 22-23 looking nervously over their shoulders. But an appointment in Erol Bulut, which conceivably could have gone either way, has gone the right way for City because he lifted them to a top half finish with a squad that on paper wasn't an awful lot better than the year before. So a testament to Erol Bulut to get a Cardiff City team battling and getting them having that fighting spirit, which the best City teams throughout history have always had. So, are there foundations there for Erol Bulut to really build something sustainable, or is the delay to Erol Bulut's new contract and maybe some of the uncertainty or indecision of the club's operations upstairs, does that imply doubt as to the club's sustainability and its ability to make real long-term progress? Lots to delve into, lots to discuss on this Summer Deep Dive. Yes, welcome along to the latest Summer Deep Dive here on EFL Debate, one of 72 we're doing club by club across the EFL between mid-June and mid-July. Already the full set for League Two uploaded to YouTube and to Spotify, so go and check those out and get yourself subscribed. For now, I'm delighted to be joined by Si from Cardiff City World. And I'm also joined by another Bluebird in Steve Day. Good evening, gents. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you joining me. Si, do Cardiff City have what it takes to make a home for themselves in the top half of the Championship?
I think as the squad is today, no, probably not. But I think a few little tweaks and stuff like that, I think they're not far off. Obviously lost a couple of first team players who were loan players last year, which makes a difference. You'd expect them to be replaced. I think getting the manager signed to his contract was important, even if it did take a bit of time.
How long that took, Si?
Yeah, I was, because I think, well, I say I was, from a fan's point of view, I was. But then if I look at it from the club's point of view, I suppose they had to assess a variety of things and decide whether he was the right man for the job. And the problem was that last season was it was like two halves. The first half was very good. The second half was about as poor as it could be. It was really, really dire to watch in the second half of the season.
But Si, I remember I was at the Birmingham City game back in April, and I remember Cardiff City fans singing very vociferously, "Erol Bulut, we want you to stay." And I'm sure that was the case at a few other games as well. So, I mean, is it just a statement of the fans being so loyal and feeling that connection to Erol Bulut that they'd stick by him even when those performance levels did drop off?
Yeah, I think obviously historically we're pretty loyal fans in terms of managers and things like that. However, I think one thing which I've said a lot over the last season was I'm very much Erol Bulut in. I thought he had enough in the bank in the first half of the season to suggest that if you give him the tools, he'll probably go on and do a very, very good job. However, just because I'm sort of Bulut in doesn't mean he's devoid of criticism. And the home performances in particular were quite poor in the second half of the season. And generally, actually, over the whole season, we were very docile at home, shall we say, to put it nicely. So I think you have to be critical and assess it all as a whole. But overall, I think the majority of the fan base is still behind Bulut. But I'd be lying if I said, towards the end of the season, especially on the channel and social media, you could really see like that sort of small percentage started to get a little bit bigger, and there were doubters within the fan base.
Steve, should we give Erol Bulut some leeway for the drop-off in the second half of the season based on, with the best will in the world, if you're a mid-table side that's got no chance of reaching the playoffs and you're facing promotion-chasing sides and teams that are battling relegation, it does get a bit harder sometimes to stay at that same level and keep the motivation as high as it could otherwise be. So should we cut Erol Bulut some slack in that regard?
I mean, yeah, you kind of hope that players are professional enough where every game, no matter what stage you are in the season or what you were fighting for, that they will still give 100%. I don't know if Si agrees with this, but it feels that as soon as it was pretty much guaranteed that we weren't going to make the playoffs, it did seem like a malaise set in with the players, and to a degree with the coaching staff as well. I think you could see in the way we were playing that quite a lot of people had checked out. And I don't think it helped with Bulut in particular that he didn't even know if he was going to be here next season. So obviously he was sort of just going into every game thinking, well, I might not be here next season. It's got to affect the way you sort of operate things across the club. But yeah, I think it's kind of like, sorry, my dog's just annoyed me a second. Yeah, I think it's like Si said, it was disappointing overall because we started the season so well, and I think you can take into account that having all of our players fit and ready and firing at the start of the season helped massively. We had Ramsey was looking like he was back to his best. We had a defence that was solid. We brought Siopis in, and he just freed up the midfield.
Yeah.
And then it just seemed that things bit by bit started to go a bit stale as the season went on. But yeah, I think that tends to happen when you end up losing something to fight for near the end of the season.
I want to ask you, Si, about those additions of last summer. Steve mentioned Manolis Siopis there, who provide real physicality and tenacity in midfield, and I think he was outstanding in the Derby game in the first half of the season. But then also, I want to bring up Dimitrios Goutas as well, who's a real battler.
Yeah, I think in Siopis's case, in my opinion, and some people will disagree with this, I know, but particularly at the start of the season, I think he's one of the best out-and-out defensive midfielders in the whole championship. He's that good. I think he had a little bit of a dip in the middle of the season, but I don't actually put that on him so much. I think it was that when Ramsey was out, we kept playing like this weird sort of flat three midfield of Wintle, Rawls and Siopis. So there was no sort of progressive passer in there or no one to go forward and create anything. And I think he almost took it upon himself to try and be the defensive midfielder, but also try and create. And, he tried to do too many things. And then actually as the season went on and he got a partner in Rawls back and we had Colwell hit a bit of form and he concentrated purely on being that defensive, midfielder. He was excellent again. And Goutas, I think it took him a little bit of time to adapt to the championship. And I think that, you've got to expect that. That's fair enough. And I think you have to accept that with the manager as well. But I thought Goutas was really good. There was a couple of moments where he gave me a heart attack, where he was diving into tackles and stuff like that. But I mean, again, he's that type of central defender where he's going to go and attack the ball. Mm-hmm. And then I think that's why him and Mark McGuinness worked so well together, because McGuinness is that traditional ball playing sort of defender, and then Goutas goes and attacks the ball. But I thought both were very good signings, actually.
It's interesting, actually, because it's funny if you go through the Cardiff team where we're often talking about the defensive aspects where we think could argue Perry and G is one of the best right backs in the championship, and Dimitrios Goutas and how brave he is, and Mark McGuinness is a ball playing defender, and who's the other one? Manolis Siopis as well. Ram Wintle quite like, and yeah, it's funny, and yeah, actually, Steve, you look at the numbers, and Cardiff City did actually concede 70 goals last season, which is certainly on the higher end of the spectrum. So how should we sort of square those two things? The credit of the individual performers for some of those individual defenders, but actually Cardiff have actually leaked quite a lot of goals as a collective.
And I think this links into what Si was saying about the way we were playing at home. We sort of very much and I know Si will know what I'm talking about here. The amount of times we'd move up the pitch to about sort of like halfway. And because we had very sort of I don't know whether it was instructions they were given by management or what, but we'd get to, Bola would be a prime example, where the ball would get to him, and then he'd always either pass back or look to cut inside. There was no sort of a lack of directness. And it was sort of, I feel that sort of invited teams onto us and gave the defence a lot to deal with.
Especially
for
a non-possession based style, you'd want to be, if you want to get the ball forward, you want to have a bit more pace at the top end of the pitch.
Yeah, and I kind of get why we had the issues we had, because I think it wasn't a sort of secret that Bullet wanted to bring Moore in, and Kiefer Moore, and the whole you could tell the whole tactic he had in mind was around being able to get the ball to stick up top and
Mm,
bring people into play. And because we didn't have that, like, Atete couldn't do that. He wasn't physical enough.
mm,
We had Ugbo playing him in the wrong sort of role. He's shown that going to Sheffield Wednesday, if you play him in the right role, he will
mm,
get you goals. But for us, it just didn't work out.
mm.
Um, and I think if in that respect, you can kind of sympathise with Bullet for how things were, but at the same time, where we would see week in, week out, the same things happening, us sitting too deep, defence being put under loads of pressure. It felt like defence had a bit of a hard time of it this season, bearing in mind that I think two of the main candidates for player of the season were like Gutas and Periunji. So,
Yeah.
it says defensive performance on their own weren't that bad, but
Mm.
yeah, and I think maybe it was a shame that obviously Jamlu Collins is still coming back from his long-term injury that he had. He's not the player that he was before. So that left side was a problem for us as well, which got exploited quite a lot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm just editing this to get this out live on Twitter. Oh, an error occurred. Can I go live? Oh, damn it! This is an error. Okay, this might have to be a YouTube thing, unfortunately, because I think I forgot to. I forgot. I forgot to put it on live, so apologies for that. But I'll get this uploaded to YouTube after we're finished, so everyone can see it. So where was I? I think that's a really interesting point that Steve raised, that actually the individual defenders played pretty well, and actually it's a case of not inviting so much pressure. But for me, Si, I think one of you touched on the sort of stodgy midfield with sort of Rawls, Siopis and Wintle, and none of them really going to provide much forward momentum. I know Ramsey does bring quality in that attacking midfield role, but I'm actually wondering if Ruben Colwill is the one who's really going to step up and be that dynamic creator this season, and Ramsey might take more of a peripheral role, dare I say.
Yeah, I think ultimately, that if we're all realistic, Aaron Ramsey is far too good for the Championship when he's fit. However, realistically, Aaron Ramsey is never going to play 30 games a season in the Championship. It's just not going to happen at this stage of his career with his injury record. I would love him to, but it's unlikely to happen. So I think Ruben Colwill will have a big responsibility to step in when Ramsey's not there. But I'd also like to see, because Ruben was the one shining light in an attacking sense last year, because everybody else around him was pretty poor, particularly towards the end of the season. And I think he was the one shining light. And so often he gets into good positions or he'll create something and there was nothing, no one around him making runs, or the striker wouldn't finish the chances. I think we worked out a couple of weeks ago that if the team had taken the one-on-one chances created by Ruben Colwill, I think he would have ended up with about 12 or 13 assists in the season. That's how many chances we missed. Which is an incredible amount of the chances missed. And I'm sure there was more created by other players. Ruben Colwill, for me, there's one or two players in that squad who I would not sell under any circumstances, and he is one of them. But some people disagree with me, but I would build the team around him.
Yeah, I mean, from an outside perspective, Si, I completely agree with you. I think he's the dynamic creator you need, and then it's a case of adding some pace out wide. But Steve, you've got Cian Ashford, who I thought made a real impression at the back end of the last season, often coming off the bench. He really impressed me at St Andrews with that sort of bursts of energy, and always wanted the ball and always wanted to make things happen. What do you see as the next step in his development?
I think we've got to take it very carefully and in a way kind of learn from the mistakes that we've made with Colwell. I think we've got to make sure that we don't sort of get ahead of ourselves. He literally played a handful of games at the end of last season. He's been a name that's been bandied around from his, performances in the academy team for quite a while now. So a lot of people were expecting to see him in the first team probably sooner than he actually got into it. I think maybe he needs to do a bit of bulking up first. It's kind of the same as Isaac Davis, where I think he's obviously benefited from going out on loan in Belgium, but it'll be interesting to see how he does coming back. I wonder if with Ashford, is it a case of trying to get him a loan deal? I wonder if they're waiting to see who they bring in first, because I'd hate to see him essentially just a backup player for the whole season and hardly used and not actually getting any game time.
Mhm.
I think if he went to a League One team, then I think he could do a job for someone at that level, and it'd be good just to get him as much experience as possible at early age.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, where was I? Goalkeeping situation, Si. Would you be happy with either Jack Alnwick or Ethan Horvath to be your number one for next season, or does it look like you're going to have to be?
Yeah, I mean, I got to be honest. I thought Jack Alnwick was really, really unlucky, and dare I say, I thought he was a bit badly treated last year by
Okay.
the manager, if you like. And it's not to say it's football, it's opinions, but the manager definitely didn't fancy him because I think the first 10, 12 games, whatever it was, the first part of the season, Jack Alnwick was one of our best players. He was exceptional in pretty much every game. And then we played Norwich. Norwich scored a couple of sort of sloppy goals, and for some reason the keeper got the blame, but it was actually Jamali Collins at the back post who had switched off as the ball came across twice. And then after that, he'd brought in Runnison on loan, and it was clear that Runnison had come in to play, and it just felt like he was waiting for Alnwick to sort of make a mistake so he could take him out the side. Runnison came in and was an absolute disaster, and that's being quite polite. He was poor, should we say? But then, as soon as the January window opened, we sent Runnison back, which was the correct decision, and then brought in Ethan Howworth, who's obviously a USA international. He's never gonna sit on the bench or certainly not going to sign for a club to sit on the bench in the Championship. He's also an established Championship keeper. I think he was a big part of Luton getting promoted previously. I didn't think he was great, actually. I thought there were some games he was very, very good, but I thought there was a few games at the end of the season where he was a little bit sloppy with his distribution and things like that. But as Steve said, like the whole team really was quite sloppy once we were sort of safe from relegation and couldn't get in the playoffs. So I'm happy. Look, I'm happy that I think they're two great Championship keepers. I'm not great, but two very good Championship keepers. And I think if you can have two keepers who you can rely on, plus one youngster who's highly rated, signed a new contract in Turner, that's three good choices. It's a position you kind of don't have to worry about at the moment. However,
Dennis is highly rated then, Si.
Say again, sorry.
Dennis, the other goalkeeper.
No, so they've got I've forgotten his name. Matt Turner, who's I think he's like 18, 19, just signed a new contract. He was in the first team squad at the end of the year when he was in there a couple of times over Alnwick on the bench. I think there was some whispers locally that Alnwick was a bit upset. He had an injury and then he didn't really get back in the squad. And to be honest with you, as a human being, I would not blame Jack Alnwick if he was a bit annoyed, because I thought there was no reason to look. Football's about opinions. If you don't fancy him, that's one thing. But to kind of frame it as he was poor, I thought was difficult to take because he wasn't. But they're two good keepers. But I do think if a club came in with some money for Jack Alnwick, bearing in mind we do need finance and we need to fund some transfers, I wouldn't be surprised if Jack Alnwick moved on, simply because I think he thinks that he should be playing first team football. And I think the manager will probably go with Howworth. Just my opinion, though. Okay.
Perry and G, Steve, one of the best right backs in the Championship for you?
Yeah, I mean, I being a Football Manager player, he was one of these players where, like, you always snap him up back in the day because he was a budget signing for Crewe. So when he signed for us, it was great because it was this guy who you signed multiple times on like Football Manager and like FIFA and things like that. And yeah, like when he came in, I thought that maybe his sort of temperament might be an issue because a few times you could see in games opposition players would get to him, and you could see him sort of like his discipline wasn't the best. He seems to have addressed that now, and he's a lot more composed. I still wonder if the money we could get for him potentially would make it worthwhile moving him on if we can get two players for him. Very impressed by Raheem Conte, who came in. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on him and saying, he's the future right back for us or whatever. Some people were calling him like Cafu at the end of last season, but I think that right back's one of these positions, without wanting to disrespect it, that it's quite easy to find a solid right back at Championship level
It's
if you
easy to
go out
find a
and look for
solid
them.
right back, but I think Perry and G's skill set is a bit more than solid, personally.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, ideally, these are the players that you'd want to keep. But if you could get, say, 5 million or upwards of that, you'd have to take the money if it came in.
Yeah.
Especially for the sort of players you could get to replace him. And
So,
that's the
so
thing.
you think,
Like we
Steve,
said,
that if you cashed in on Perry and G, you'd have someone ready-made like Raheem Conte to step up potentially, and then you'd be able to reinvest that money in other areas?
yeah, I don't think Conte's ready to be a regular yet. I think he's showing potential again, like Keane Ashford. He only played a handful of games last season, but you can see potentials there. But yeah, I think the sounds coming out of the club were that they'd be willing to listen to offers for Unji if the money was there. But yeah, if he stays, great. But if not, and we invest the money elsewhere, then that's okay. If you ask me, we need more players pretty much at the moment because we got a shell of a squad.
Yeah. Jamali Collins, he's had a bit of an injury disrupted couple of years since signing in 2022. Is 24-25 looking like a big season for him?
Yeah, I think so. I think some people were a bit harsh on Jamali at the start of the season. He came back from a long-term injury, and it was clear, you could see in the first couple of games, that he was very apprehensive, very tentative. And I think actually it was might have been even the Swansea game, but there was a game at home where he kind of flew into a 50-50, won it, and you could see he got up and he kind of flexed his knee, and it was almost as if psychologically he was like, right, he got through that big tackle, didn't sort of have a relapse. And then I thought he pushed on. I thought defensively, I know I mentioned an error he made just now, but like, I thought defensively he was pretty good all season. He did have a little bit of a dip where he lost his place to the Esperand, who came in on loan. But actually, I thought he was our best option at left back all season. I thought he was probably the best player there. And just towards the end of the season, you started to see him get forward a little bit more. Like before his injury, he was a bit of a gun-ho fullback, whereas since he came back, he almost has gone just like to a traditional old school left back who kind of stays in his position, holds back. And I think that frustrates the fans a little bit, particularly when we were just playing this possession-based football of.
Well, what I would wonder, Sty, is do you have a situation where you invert Perry and G into midfield at times because he is quite flexible like that, and then Jamali Collins tucks into into sort of a back three, because that would make sense from.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that. In the first half of the season, Bulut did that quite a lot, where NG would push up into the midfield and Collins would just slot in, and it worked really well. I think one of the issues we had, obviously, losing Ramsey was a big part of the tactics changing, but also at the start of the season, our passing had a lot of purpose. So we were playing possession-based football, passing from the back. It was all kind of nice and tidy. But at the start of the season, there was movement and it was with purpose. But then as the season kind of went on, it became quite sideways, backwards, and a bit less purposeful. But Jamali Collins, I think, is quality. Just going quickly on to Perry and G, you guys were mentioning. Sure. I think he's the only right back that I think is better than him as an overall skill set in the Championship is probably Walker Peters, who obviously got promoted.
Of course, yeah, he was brilliant.
And interestingly, and I could ask you, Gabe, this: if Southampton sold Walker Peters this summer, do you think they'd sell him for 5 million?
What? Oh no chance. It'd be 50 million.
Cardiff are awful at selling their prized assets. This historically, we sold Aaron Ramsey for sort of, I think it was 3 million or something. We've always been bad at it. But I see this 5 million, and I said myself, if we can get 5 million, we should take it. But when I compare it, I don't really see any other right backs who have the same skill set, his age profile. Everything is kind of in place for him to be, to have a go at playing in the Premier League. And really, we should be asking for more, I think, personally. But it is what it is. I'd get Cody Dramer on a free, though, if we sold NG.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a great signing.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Where was I? I wanted to talk to you, Steve, about Eli King, because he had a fantastic loan last season at Morecambe. I think he might have been recalled in January. I can't remember if you sent him somewhere else. But I know I've spoken to Dave Salmon, who's a Morecambe commentator, and he's basically said what a player. He's got a huge future and a really exciting prospect. So is the feeling the same at the Cardiff City Stadium?
I think second half of the season he was up in Scotland. Was it
Yeah,
Ross
Ross
County
County.
or someone like that? Yeah, and he was in their playoff game, and playoff games at there, he absolutely dominated it. He looked like my doubts about him was always that he hadn't built up physically yet for being in centre mid in Championship. But in that game, I know, you can make disparaging comments about the level of the Scottish Premiership. You still have to be a capable player to play at that level.
Yeah.
And you've seen the amount of players that come from the Scottish Championship and Scottish Premiership and come down to the Championship and make a career for themselves.
Yeah.
So I think it can be quite a good marker of where a player is in their development. So I think he's certainly one player where he'd be worth giving him a go this season, because I think even before he went out on loan, a lot of fans could see that he had the raw ability there and that there was a decent player in there. I think the trouble is now he isn't getting any younger. And I know that sounds mad for a player in their early 20s, but that's the way the game is these days. If they haven't started
Yeah.
making an impact by that sort of 21, 22 level, question marks appear over their name. But yeah, I mean, I like him. It shouldn't matter, but when my son met him, he was just really good with my son as well.
Oh,
So he's
that's good.
always helps to win the fans over, doesn't it?
Yeah, certainly does. Si, do you envisage a world in which Joe Rawls has a bit of a downward curve this season? Eli King has a bit of an upward curve, and actually Eli King ends up taking Joe Rawls' spot and ends up playing alongside Manolis Siopis in midfield?
So if I could dodge the question very briefly, just only briefly, because what it is I was assessing our midfield. I think most Cardiff fans and the manager agree we need a bit more dynamic number 8. It's probably one on the list of players someone to play alongside Siopis, with Rawls coming in now and again. So when you look at our midfield, we have Siopis, Rawls. So Siopis is obviously the manager's guy. Rawls is the club captain, just signed a new contract. Turnbull came in the summer. And then you have obviously Eli King, who's been out on loan. You have Joel Colwell, who's probably going to go on loan, I think, this season. And then you have Ryan Wintle. To me, if you're going to bring another midfielder in, whether that be signing someone or keeping Eli King, you've got to move someone out. And I think Ryan Wintle's probably the odd one out there because of circumstances.
I guess, Si, I think Ryan Wintle's main strength is collecting the ball off the defence and pinging it to the flanks and getting moves going, which I think can be incredibly valuable. But I almost wonder if stylistically, the way that Erol Bulut likes to play, which is getting the ball forward early, probably doesn't suit Ryan Wintle or maximise his main skill set. Not to say he can't dig in defensively and put in a shift and be a solid player, but I'm wondering if you're not necessarily getting the best out of him. And so the money that you could get for Ryan Wintle, you might be able to sign a ball carrier, like you mentioned, a dynamic 8 who's going to offer something different to the midfield equation.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think on Eli King, Eli can play as a defensive midfield. So you could potentially use him as a young backup for Siopis when he needs a break. He can also play as an 8, and it's impossible to judge really. Look, he played 42 games last year in total and scored a couple, got 5 assists. So he's clearly got something about him. We've been quite successful in the Scottish market. Like Steve mentioned, it does translate quite well to the Championship. So I think my feeling, without seeing a lot of it, is that if he did well in Scotland, then I would definitely give him a chance. And I'd see if he's best suited to, is he going to be the backup to Siopis, or could he be that one that we're looking for to play alongside Siopis? And I guess it'll be interesting.
What do you think, Si, about a midfield of King, Siopis and Colwell? Because I think that could work quite nicely, because you've got Eli King sitting, you've got Siopis doing the destructive work. King can do a bit of that, but Siopis has got that physicality and tenacity, if you like. And then you've got Ruben Colwell, who can be that sort of more dynamic, creative player that you've mentioned there. I'm not sure. Would you call him a good ball carrier as well, Ruben Colwill?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so that could give you quite a nice blend, I would wonder, because then also having King sitting might allow Siopis to go and be more aggressive and maybe force the issue a bit more out of possession, whereas as a sole pivot, he might have to be a bit more careful, if you like. So I'm wondering about those three as a trio.
So sort of two things really. If I was doing it, I would have Siopis as the sitter, just because I think he's so good at sweeping up from his teammates. We had a situation at the end of the season where Ollie Tanner, who's a winger, played left back for a few games, and Tanner did great, but a couple of times he got caught way up the pitch, and Siopis just quietly sort of swept up behind him. I really like it. I like him as that sort of sitter. But with Eli King, I saw him play more as a youngster and in the academy than I have last season. If he can replicate the skill set and the attributes that he showed in the academy and as a youngster, as an adult and in the first team and at championship level, he's absolutely, he'd be a really, really good player. And I agree with you that it would be that would be the sort of blend we're looking for, where you've got someone next to Siopis who can progress the ball and follow it, but also have Ruben. I do wonder if Ramsey's fit, whether Ruben, I think people assume that he's going to be on the bench if Ramsey's fit. I actually think
I don't think that should be the state of play. I think Ruben Colwill, you start Ruben Colwill, and then you have Aaron Ramsey as a lovely option, a lovely problem to have on the bench. I think that's how Cardiff should start the season, because then it's like, imagine the psychological thing of if Ruben Colwill, if we need to change a game, we've got Aaron Ramsey on the bench. What a lift that gives to the players. Yeah. But whilst also solving the problem of Aaron Ramsey, not sure you can rely on him for over a full season. So you're using Ramsey's minutes really well. And when he's not on the pitch, there's that psychological thing of him potentially coming on, as opposed to him playing 60 minutes. And then when he goes off, it's like you've lost Aaron Ramsey. So that's how I would kind of approach it from a psychological point of view. And I think Ruben Colwill, for me, he seems to be a really exciting proposition.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it can work both ways, can't it? Because obviously, if you bring Colwill off the bench against a tired team, he can do a lot more damage with his attributes and his skill set. But I actually have a feeling that we might see Ramsey in the 10, and I think we might see Ruben off the right, playing in almost like what like Phil Foden does for Man City, where he starts off on the right and out of possession he'll be on the right wing, but actually as soon as we have possession he'll have free reign to.
Is he left-footed, Ruben Colwill?
He is, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, right, that makes sense.
Yeah,
because that happened a few times last season, wasn't it, where Turnbull played 10 and then Bulut moved Colwill out wide for that, so it was almost like he's aware that he can do a job out there, and he did quite well out there, to be fair.
Yeah, I think Colwill forced his way into the side as well because at the start of the season, or even when Ramsey first got injured, Bulut didn't really seem to fancy him. He always was the one to be rotated or dropped or on the bench, and it was only really through performances and being that sort of shining light, as I said earlier, that he kind of became that starter. And I think it would be madness if he ends up on the bench at the start of the season now, because I think he is that stand-up. He's also like not your stereotypical number 10. He is a big boy, like he's a unit. And I think that gives us an advantage because he's not like that, what everyone sort of expects, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think, Steve, for Cardiff City to play this counter-attacking style of football, I think I'm looking at it. I think you need to add searing pace into those wide areas and maybe even to an extent up top. What do you think?
I can't remember the last time we had pace. Can you say? It's been a while, hasn't it? Like genuine sort of pace in the team. Going back to when Warnock was here, we built very much solid base of a squad that was more about physicality. But I mean, yeah, like we had it a bit last season with Colin Grant, but we never sort of unleashed it because we never got the ball in
he's
behind.
Not that quick, is he, Colin Grant?
Yeah, and it would be nice to have a bit more directness about us, because I think if you want to battle for top 6 in the Championship, you need that sort of outlet. Players that are willing to get in behind and just run at the opposition defence. Otherwise, you just become too predictable.
Sure. So up top then, Si, I can't say I'm hugely inspired by any of the options, because Steve mentioned earlier that Kiona Tete, he's got a good leap on him. I think he's very selfless, but he's not particularly physical. Hopefully he can work on that over the summer. Yaku Mighty is very physical, and he can be dangerous in the air, but technically he's a little bit limited. You've got Isaac Davis, who, again, the physical side of things I'd question. I would see him more as a second striker. And then you've got Jeffries and Wigley, who have only just come through the academy. So for me, even though you've technically got 5 strikers options there, I still think that you probably need another one that's a bit more of a rounded package.
I would say, without a shadow of a doubt, we need 2 strikers. I think Kiona Tete is an interesting one. There's a large part of the fan base who would probably sell him, but I actually think he showed 1 or 2 pieces of technical brilliance. He scored a couple of goals against Blackburn, and I think it was in the EFL Cup, and they were such good goals technically, and kind of out of nowhere one of them was, where I was like, wow, if he can do that, I could see why the manager has been sticking by him, because I think there was frustration there with his body language. He kept falling over. He wasn't really strong. I think Steve said it, I would send him out on loan to League One, because I think that for Kiona Tete would be brilliant. Play 30, 40 games at League One level, score some goals, have, almost take a bit of a battering from those big centre halves, and do it that way, because I don't think he's ready to play Championship football as a first choice striker. But we almost, as I said, we played without a number 9 all season, really, it felt like, because you had the Tete, who I just mentioned, then you had Mete play through the middle. His link-up play is really good.
Oh.
But every time he got into, like an opportunity to score, he just missed the chance, and it was, or he would hesitate and things like that. So I think he is more suited to a wide area. Isaac Davis is a fascinating one, because it seems like, or it feels like, a lot of Cardiff fans would be willing to sell him, even off the back of a good loan. But outside of Cardiff, it seems like a lot of clubs are interested in him, and he's been linked with, I think, Anderlecht and Monaco and Burnley and all these different football clubs. I think, look, he went to Corvick and he did as well as he could have done. He scored, I think, 14 goals, a couple of assists, got player of the season. You couldn't have asked for any more from him. I think as a young man, he left Wales, left his family, went and lived in Belgium for a year. That matures anybody, that sort of situational change. He's obviously come on a little bit as a player. My only concern is how does that level of football compare to the Championship? I have no idea. So I don't know if it's a similar level, it's similar in physicality, things like that. I've only sort of seen clips. I would like to think he'd hit the ground running, because I think if he hits the ground running, I think he can be a sort of backup option through the middle, and then he'll play a lot of his football out wide. Mm-hmm. But I think we will end up doing is we'll sign an out-and-out number 9, who is our guy, and then I think we'll sign a sort of player who can play wide and through the middle. So it'd be interesting, though. I think we'll probably end up going back in for Kiefer Moore again. I did a video on it yesterday, but
we'll see. I definitely think a mobile focal point and some real pace out wide, with one of them maybe being able to play up top, would be needed. Steve, any young talents coming through the academy that we've not mentioned yet that you're excited about, or do you reckon we've covered most of the prospects?
I think we've covered the main ones. I mean, the next wave after that, it would be hard to tell. It's very early in their development, so it would be hard to tell whether you can pinpoint them as top prospects, and you don't really want to heap that sort of pressure on players that are like 16, 17. I think main ones we got are the ones that were coming through at the back end of last season, like Ashford, Conte, and we had was it Louis Giles as well. He looked decent when he came on. We've got, it's nice that we've got players coming through, because I think for a while we had a bit of a dormant spell with the youth team. So it'll be interesting how they're managed over the next few years now, and the crop behind them, because I think it's important that clubs have a pathway from the youth team to the first team.
Yeah.
And if these youngsters now are playing every week and they're sort of like in the youth academy, if they're playing, they're like, oh, well, the lot that came ahead of us, they're now getting into the first team. So this isn't just a pipe dream. This is something where we can actually do this and achieve this. It could affect their motivation, and you could start seeing more and more players coming through.
Joel Colwell is one that I would keep an eye on. I know that I know Dan Pearce, who's obviously the manager of the under 23s. Joel Colwell is so highly rated within the football club and so highly rated outside of the football club. However, he is a bit lightweight, so I think it'll be interesting whether he goes out on loan this year to try and bulk him up. But
do you think he could get League Two as a first-time loan, or do you think it'll be National League?
I think he should. I mean, if it's the right club, I think he's capable of playing at League One. But I think realistically, League Two would be probably a safe.
I'd be very surprised if League One clubs would be taking him on loan.
There's some big clubs in there, isn't there? Yeah, I think if you can get him in like League Two, basically, if you can get him sort of in as high a level as possible, I think, and get him game time playing week in, week out against experienced footballers who've, there's some journeymen down at the bottom end of the league system. And when I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, I just mean, players who've been around the block, they know all the little tricks off the ball, and they will, really bring on a player like that, because Joel Colwell, in terms of technical ability, is potentially better than his brother. Like, he is that good. He is an exceptional footballer, but he's not ready yet, which is why I think when you saw Bulut use some of the younger players at the end of the season, people were screaming out for Joel Colwell weeks out, but he only had a few minutes.
Is he an 8 or a 6?
At the moment, he's more of an 8, I think. Okay. But I think he could probably play, as a 10 as well.
Right.
He's quite aggressive. He's a bit more aggressive than Ruben in terms of his. He puts himself up out a bit, shall we say?
Expectations for this season, Steve. I think there's multiple facets to this. One, the most obvious is results, and ideally you want to finish in the top half of the table. Another one would be developing players like Ruben Colwell, ideally, and a few of the other young players that we've spoken about. And I guess Raheem Conte, maybe you could put in that equation. And another one would be to stylistically develop in terms of having a bit more of an outlet, so that you're not putting as much pressure on the defence, and just making progress in from a tactical perspective. So sort of juggling those things together, is it possible that Cardiff could finish 17th or 18th but make progress in other areas and still consider it a good season? Or would you say you've got to finish in the top half to consider it sort of progress, if you like?
I mean, the long and short of it is always that progress in football essentially is always measured on where you finish, isn't it? Like, if you can progress off the pitch all you want, but eventually, if you keep going backwards in the league table, that's going to catch up with you.
Yeah.
I think we generally have quite an impatient fan base. Like at the start of this season, everyone was saying, right, if we finish higher than last season, it's a success. We got to the end of the season, and quite a few people were kind of like, oh, I'm disappointed we've only finished like mid-table.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, I think the common sense thing is, yeah, but we have still made progress, and that's fine. It'll be interesting now to see what happens now. Bulut's not got the embargo to worry about. He's got more of his own coaching staff in. He's got more of what he wants available there to him. There's still a lot of work to do. I think we can all agree our squad right now, if we went into the season started tomorrow, we would be in a relegation battle or like in that lower end of the table. But I think so fine are the margins in Championship football that you can add 4 or 5 players and suddenly your expectations can just go from like down there right up to there. But even then, you still need a bit of luck. You still need, those runs throughout the season. So yeah, I mean, as long as there is some sort of progress on the pitch in terms of performances and results as well, that's fine. Even if we finish 11th, or 10th, it's okay. In terms of youth development, I mean, it's roulette with youth development, isn't it? You can't sort of really heap pressure on players of that age. If they come out
No,
and
but
start
I'm
performing
saying
well, that's great.
if you raise the value of the squad, you could argue that that's a positive aspect of the season because, let's say, for example, Ruben Colwell had a massive breakout campaign. You might consider that sort of progress in one aspect. Si, what's your take on that?
So I will go with what Erol Bulut said, which is if he gets the players that he wants, he expects to be competing for the playoffs. However, I think we've got a really good basis for a side.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't got no depth, and we haven't got a striker, and we haven't probably need a bit more creativity from the deeper areas, and we definitely need pace. But I think being realistic, you're always going to bring in the championship. You're always going to bring in at least 3 loans. The embargo's been lifted. I said at the start of the season last year when Bulut came in, if we could finish in the top 12 that season, then sort of get towards competing in the playoffs this season coming, and then in his 3rd season, if you haven't sort of slipped into the playoffs at the last minute or whatever, is then the 3rd season is where he's got to really be pushing the side on. I was concerned that he would leave because I felt like in terms of a rebuild, he did an excellent job under some real difficult circumstances with the embargo and certain other things. I think I think there was some issues towards the end of the season, but I do also think he's addressed some of those. He's got left one coach's assistant manager's left. He's brought in a more attacking coach. They brought in a couple of analysts, which I think is another issue, but that's a positive step. And I think if we add sort of 3 good loans, whether they be young players from the Premier League or championship sides or whatever it may be, I think he'll dip into the sort of Turkish or Cypriot market as well, or European market. So it'd be interesting because I don't think we're as far off as people think. I think if you can bring in one exceptional winger, one really good striker, an 8 and a fullback, I think we're not going to be far off.
Yeah, I think
anything on top of that is good.
If I was to hold you to the standards of challenging for the top 6, I think I had in my head before we had this conversation, by the way. I think you've got about 7 players that are good enough for a top 6 challenge, which, funny enough, probably fits in quite nicely with what you were saying there. So I think Perrin G is good enough. I think Gutas and McGuinness are good enough. I think Manolis Siopis is good enough. I think Ruben Colwell is good enough. And I think is that about it? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So maybe about 5. I think Elon King could get there, and maybe Jamali Collins isn't too far off. But 5 to 7 players, I think you've got. So basically about half the team, I think you've got there. And then it's a case of whether a few of the other players can develop a little bit ahead of schedule, somebody like Eli King or Cian Ashford maybe. And then you need another few good additions. So that's where I think you're at. I think about half the team is there, but then maybe the other half needs a bit of work in different forms.
Yeah, I think if you could bring in, like I say, those 4 really good players for championship level, what happens is the likes of, say, a Turnbull. I think Turnbull's someone we haven't really talked about. If he can replicate his form in Scotland, he'll go on to be an excellent addition for Cardiff. But I think it took him a bit of time to settle, didn't play too much. But he's definitely got the ability.
Is he dynamic enough for the style?
I think he can be. I think he should play deeper. I think he should have played as number 8 towards the end of last season alongside Siopis, but he only did it for 15 minutes again. I think it was Birmingham away, and he came on, and it was he would play the ball into Colwell's feet, and then he would be following it, looking for the return ball, and actually him as the 8, Colwell 10, and Ashford on the right. It worked really well. The link-up play was great, but we never saw him play there again. He always tried to. They were always playing him in the number 10, and I thought he struggled to play with his back to goal a little bit. But it took him time to settle, and I do think set pieces he's supposed to be very good as well. So I wouldn't write him off too much straight away, but obviously at the moment he's not at the level. But I do think, sorry, that's what I was saying. If you bring in 4 really good players, especially in the forward areas, I think is where we're struggling.
Yeah.
The depth of the squad suddenly becomes a lot better, because then you can have Isaac Davis, Kean Ashford, those young dynamic players who are maybe not quite ready to play week in, week out. But if you give them 20 minutes off the bench when you need a goal, or you need something special to happen, and you need that sort of raw, carefree attitude that the young players so often bring, that's perfect. But we have to first and foremost, we just got to get a striker. We just have to get a striker that we can actually play, because otherwise we're going to struggle.
And I think bringing
That's a
in the
big
striker, it'll
takeaway.
be interesting to see how that impacts on the way Bulut plays as well. I think that it was obvious last season that kind of handicapped him a bit. So hopefully, if we bring in that striker, 2 strikers, it will then sort of, take the shackles off a bit, and we'll see us be more of an attacking threat. Because last season, like I said, it was docile, to put it politely. So it's
The
it'll be
one
interesting to see.
Sure. The one concern I would have with Kiefer Moore is I feel like he plays best when the whole dynamics of the team are built around him. And I kind of feel like the way I would like to see Cardiff City play is this really dynamic one-touch football where you're getting the football into. Maybe Kiefer Moore can fit in with that, but for me, the priority's got to be a physical centre forward who can operate as a focal point, but is also mobile enough to thrive in transitional situations as well as crosses and set pieces. I know Kiefer Moore can be incredibly dangerous from crosses and set pieces. How effective he's going to be at this stage of his career in transitional moments would be my slight question mark, especially for the sort of money that you'd be likely having to pay for him.
Yeah, I think he's pretty good with his feet. I think in terms of playing quick football around him, I think he could do that. I agree with you, like, especially as his career is going on now, I wonder whether, if the manager's looking to play quite a pressing style out of possession, he may struggle a little bit with that. But I think if you look at the way Wales play, Wales often look their most dangerous, or certainly Daniel James looks his most dangerous when Kiefer Moore plays, because not just for flick-ons and things like that, Kiefer Moore will drop in deep and pull the centre-back with him, and then Daniel James will run in behind with his pace.
Right.
And they use that. So they don't necessarily use Kiefer Moore as like a target man. They use him to pull the defenders out of place. And then the amount of one-on-ones I see Daniel James have for Wales is astounding. I mean, he doesn't always score them, but that's another story. But I mean, like, they use Kiefer Moore to pull the centre-backs out of position, which at the moment might not work for Cardiff, because we have not really got that electric pace. But if we could get someone in the wide areas with a lot of pace, and then you can use it. And I don't necessarily think it has to be Kiefer Moore, just someone of a similar profile and ability would be good. I just think Kiefer Moore ticks. If the manager and the club had a list of attributes they wanted from their striker, I think Kiefer Moore probably ticks more than he doesn't, is my point, I guess.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, Steve, what's the biggest reason to believe that Cardiff City can meet their ambitions this season?
I think because we're still relatively an unknown quantity. I think we're that to ourselves at the moment. So it's going into this season, like, teams will come up against us, and I think they'll base a lot of their ideas about how to deal with us on last season, because they'll think, right, they've got the same manager, largely got the crux of the same squad. We know they're going to sit back, look to hit us on the counter attack. But I think if we bring in the right sorts of players, then early on in the season we can catch a lot of teams on the hop, because I think potentially we could change the way we play quite a bit. So I think that's just the unpredictability of it, really.
Si, what's the biggest reason for doubt?
If the manager is stubborn, as we saw sometimes last year, he might create his own problems, because there was points at last year where there were certain times, particularly at home in the second half of the season, where I was just thinking, God, just name a slightly more attacking side and the crowd will be with you an hour before kickoff, because that's what we were crying out for. And it would be the same kind of very defensive side and the same players who had not necessarily been doing it. And I think there was frustration in the fan base. So I'd like to see him be a bit more flexible in his tactics. And because I thought at the start of the season, one of my shows I did, I said that his tactical ability to adapt to different teams was really, really impressed me in the early part of the season. He set up differently to Leeds, to Birmingham, or to Derby, or not Derby, sorry. Who was it? Leicester. Like he set up slightly different for each team, and he got results. And then as the season went on, it became very samey, and players are tired, players are injured, etc. I'd like to see him go back to that flexibility, because I think he's definitely got it in him. But that is my concern, is the stubbornness and the lack of attacking prowess, shall we say.
Steve, too early for a prediction, I think, because a lot can change between now and the end of the window or the start of the season. Give me a number, though, between 1 and 10 to denote your level of optimism for the season ahead.
I'd probably say, I think because it's so dependent on who we bring in, I'm going to take a punt. I think we could push for the top 6 if we bring in the right sorts of players, but
Okay.
I don't want to be looking an idiot when we end up just outside it. So I'm going to say 8th.
Oh, you go for an 8?
8th.
That's higher than I was expecting you to say, actually. Si, what about you? What number would you go for?
I'm fairly optimistic, because I think Erol Bulut's the right man. I think the club is behind Erol Bulut. Like, the chairman is really, really behind him. I also think he's made some good adaptations behind the scenes, as I say. So I'm pretty optimistic, because I also think we have 5 or 6 excellent young players who are on the brink of the first team. So that, mixed with bringing in the right players, I'd probably say a 7, because we don't know who they're going to bring in. And Cardiff City, as optimistic as the fans are, we have a habit of then being brought back down to earth very quickly by not signing players or not backing the manager. So we'll see.
Sure. Before we go, actually, Si, how do you feel about the ownership and off-field circumstances? Because it's been an area that's had a bit of back and forth over the years. How are you feeling about the club on a structural level?
One of the things which I've said many times, I said it last season again, is that it's vital that the football club has a football structure. At the moment, one of the most frustrating things for me personally is that the owner is obviously away. Isn't there day to day. The chairman isn't there day to day. All the people making the football decisions, they're all kind of very, very good businessmen, very capable, but there's nobody with any football knowledge between the manager and the board and the transfer committee. There's nobody.
For a modern championship club, that is shocking, isn't it?
It's exceptionally poor, because there's been many opportunities and many things over the past 18 months alone where if you had a football guy in there, like even last year when January came around, and I think I think Steve mentioned earlier that there was a bit of frustration whereby the expectations changed. At the start of the season, everyone said, mid-table, 20, if we finished top 10, that'd be great. And then as the season went on, people were disappointed because we didn't get to the playoffs. And I think that came, one, because the side overachieved and the manager overachieved in the first part of the season. But I also think that the fans felt like in January, the embargo had been lifted. There was an opportunity to bring in the right players and kick on. And we didn't. We brought in Turnbull, which I thought was a good signing. We brought in Halworth, which was a good signing. But then we didn't get Kiefer Moore. But it felt like we got Jeju from, I forgot where he came from, sorry. But we brought Jeju in, and he was very disappointing, to say the least. And it just felt like a missed opportunity, if you like, to really kick on. And I think that football structure off the field is a big issue. I've discussed it with Mehmet Dalman, who's the chairman, myself, but is what it is. It's the owner's decision, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Yeah, well, hopefully the club can start to make some progress off the field and get a bit of a footballing mind upstairs, because I think that would help Erol Bulut a lot. But a positive first season from him in charge. Si, thanks so much for your insight this afternoon, or this evening even. Really appreciate your time. Everyone go subscribe to Cardiff City World. Thanks as well to Steve Day for your insight as well. This has been the EFL Debate Summer Deep Dive on Cardiff City. Get yourself subscribed on YouTube and on Spotify. If you've watched this on YouTube, get your comments in below and let me know how you think Cardiff will get on this season. And if you've enjoyed it on Spotify, feel free to drop us a review. That would help us out an awful lot. Thanks very much once again, and we'll see you again here on EFL Debate for another Summer Deep Dive very soon.